Hello, I'm Alice Bramhill, and this is for the deep feelers and the big hearted people pleasers. And I wanted to do an episode today talking about asking for help and why that's so hard, not just for neurodivergent folk. I think for all of us generally, it can be something that's really, really tricky. It comes up again and again in the therapy room and coaching clients. And it's been something that has really been a massive part of my life, why we don't ask for help. And we know that if you're neurodivergent, it's probably much, much harder. And I want you to know that this doesn't mean that you are in any way too independent, you're not being too difficult, you're not broken. What you're doing is you're really responding exactly how your nervous system learned to respond when you were in need. So let's talk a bit about why this happens. So, first of all, asking for help requires explaining, and explaining often takes energy we don't have. So, we've got to put something into words that feels obvious to us. We'd have to justify why we need it and what we need. And if you're overwhelmed, this already feels impossible. But also, what if it is that you don't know what you need? So, how can you ask for the thing you need when you don't even know what it is you need? You know you feel overwhelmed and it's all too much, but you don't actually know what is the answer to that. And I've struggled with this quite a lot in my life. When people have said, "What can I do to help?" Oh, I literally don't know. And the last thing I can articulate in that moment is what is wrong. My brain is already using all its resources just to keep going, and adding that task of explaining and trying to get someone else to understand. It's just a bit too much in the moment. And I guess the second part of it as well is that we're not used to necessarily our needs being met. Our brains have filed away like years of evidence, years of asking and being told that, it's because we're being too sensitive. Can I have this? Can I have that? Well, you're just being too sensitive. Or you're being too dramatic, too demanding, being told just to try harder. So, to be more resilient. And it might be that you have you have really tried asking for help in those maybe formative years and even later years, and it's difficult because that has been met with a negative response. Our nervous systems learn that asking for help leads to disappointment, and it feels much safer not to try. You just don't even put yourself in that position of being denied the help that you're seeking. Um, and we also might have received help that like completely missed the point. We might have been given advice when we needed understanding. How many times have we had conversations where we maybe just want to kind of talk it through, but we're instantly given advice, which I don't know about you, but for me just shuts me down. Unless I've specifically said I'd like some help with this. So, I mean, it's quite a conundrum, isn't it? But I think definitely being told that we shouldn't be struggling in the first place, I think that is like one of the major things that I've heard when we really dig around and try and excavate around, where did we learn this? Where does this feel familiar? And where do you think you heard that? And so often it is in those early times of our lives when we're just learning, you know, how we operate within the world and how we operate in a relational world. So yeah, that leads us to eventually stop asking. Um, and because of that, unfortunately, that means then we don't get to continue practicing asking for this help and support. And that usually can be often like decades of hiding what you're struggling with. And also, thinking about the systems, the school system. How long was it before I mentioned that? The school system where, it operates, particularly, when you have different needs, when you're neurodivergent, it works on a basis a lot of the time on people knowing the answer to things. And if you don't know the answer to things, there's either questions about why you don't know it, being told that you should know it, and feeling either shame, embarrassment, or humiliation at the fact that you don't know the answer to something. And because of that competitive culture, where we're pitted against each other right from a really, really early age, we're learning that not knowing something, not being competent in something, often comes with some negative consequences. Children who maybe don't learn to read at the same time as other children then have to go in early for extra reading, or maybe have to stay behind. And that does set up a message that it's very, it puts you in a really vulnerable position if you don't know what other people know. So then we do, another extra layer of masking, pretending that we know perhaps, or that we've got it, we're capable, we've got this, because of the vulnerability that we feel when we don't know the answer. And it took me years. I'm 51, and it took me years to even recognise, that this is what I'd been doing. And I think, if I'm totally honest, I'm only in the early stages of learning to ask for help and knowing that that is an okay thing to do. And what I've noticed is something really interesting, that, like when I'm heading towards burnout, which I feel like I was kind of in this last month because I was doing a lot, and we had kind of bereavement to deal with, and all the things that threw up too. And I was finishing the edits on my first book, and I was loving that. So I was getting lots of dopamine. But it kind of got worse, that, I noticed that, like, I was being asked, what can I do to support you? Like, oh, you're doing a lot. And it was almost like this, like, runaway train that I didn't know. I could see what was happening, almost like watching myself do more and more and more, spinning more plates, running around more, just trying to find time where I didn't have time. And the more overwhelmed I realised that I was, the less I was able to reach out precisely at the moment when I needed the support the most. You couldn't write it, could you? And I wonder if other people experience that too. My capacity to ask for help shrinks exactly when I need it to expand. And there's something else that I've noticed, both in myself and with my clients, is, there is this kind of real hit, this dopamine surge from doing it myself. Like, it feels like achievement, like I'm proving something, if I'm really honest about it. When I get out of, that unconscious state, that I can do it all. And that really goes back for me to being a young carer when I was growing up, and having, I guess, quite a lot of demands placed on me because, I did fairly well at school, and that, was really pushed, in the sense of, you show any little bit of capability, that can often be perceived as, when you have free time, or teachers might then say, well, we need to push them because they are clever. That in itself, that's a whole nother episode there. Um, and also, I grew up with a very hypercritical parent who would very much see not being capable as a weakness. And that was their own experience, and that was unchecked and passed down generationally. And so if you're in a system, in a family, a community with significant others where they value capability and being capable and knowing how to get stuff done and not causing a fuss, well, you come along and you do have needs, right? You've got sensitivities. There's certain things you like and you dislike. You find certain things uncomfortable. You're not born thinking any of this. You learn by responding to those around you and what their values are. So you very quickly learn that needing help, asking for help, is actually not going to go down too well. And that means it's going to put you potentially in quite a vulnerable situation and subject to even more criticism. So, we learn very quickly, don't we, that your worth equals your capability, your productivity, and the part that believes that asking for help means you failed. And I think particularly for any of you who've grown up, and I think this is true across all classes, but growing up in a very working class household initially, and we did sort of move into middle classdom, but at that point, that's when things really fell apart. But those values were about work hard, and there wasn't a lot of room for needs in there. And that was also a survival response that was in operation there. And I know I've lived in survival mode for many, many years until the last decade or so. So I wanted to offer maybe a different way of thinking about this as I kind of learn that for me in my work that I perhaps do need somebody to help me. I really do need someone to help me do some of my tasks. Because I do enjoy it so much too, right? And I enjoy it so much. Obviously, no one can come in and do my one-to-one work. That's what I do. And I absolutely love that. I love my group work. I love my writing. But, in terms of the behind the scenes stuff, and I see other people do it and I think, oh my God, how are they able to have that help and support? But of course, that is available to me too. And I'm very privileged, because that is available. But my main barrier has been being able to acknowledge that I need that help and support, because that doesn't mean that I am failing. That by getting that help and support is no kind of reflection on me as a person. And just before I started recording this, I was listening to the radio, and here in the UK, we've just had the budget announced. And I always find it interesting, but I was kind of fuming. And just listening out, it's interesting, isn't it, when you start to notice how often the word productivity and growth was used when we were talking about the budget. So the budget in the UK is where they plan, the government kind of announces how they're going to be spending money, where they're going to get income from. And it's more often than not a lot of talk about taxes and who gets taxed. And of course, lo and behold, people who earn less money are going to be taxed the most, and we're still not taxing wealth in the way that we should be. But the focus very much on how's the government going to get this money, and productivity, we need to keep that going. We're focused on growth. And, we do live within that very much, that mindset that we've got to be moving forward, pounding, getting productive and growing. And I think, self-development and growth is really, really important. But this focus on growing outwardly, financially, to be seen to be doing this, when obviously I feel like I could go down a tangent here, which I'm already starting to. So I've noticed that. But what I mean is, it's so much in our language and culture. It's omnipresent. And so we do learn that if we're not in that kind of forward momentum, right? This idea that it's all linear, that we just keep growing and growing and growing, and to sort of fall off that in some way, or to say, this is really difficult for me, that is perceived and has traditionally been perceived as a weakness. And I do think things have changed, and that's brilliant. So there's the cultural changes that need to happen. But I guess, alongside that, because it is a cultural issue, it's a societal issue. This isn't just down to the individual. None of it, no kind of growth in terms of learning about ourselves is just an individual issue. But I do think that once we can start to learn and understand about nervous system safety and how we can really cultivate that for ourselves, beginning to trust that our needs do matter and they do have a place, and challenging that conditioning that we're told that we had to manage alone. It is super tricky to do that, but it is possible too. And finding the people who are going to support you in that endeavour. That recognition that we're not meant to do everything ourselves, even though we're told so much about individual responsibility. It is something we're all learning to believe. And what I know from this, like both personally and professionally, is that, we're not struggling to ask for help, because we're too independent, we're too this, we're too that. Because we learned, we struggle because we learned it wasn't safe to ask and to need support. And unlearning that does take time. It takes a lot of practice being in relationships and environments where our needs are actually met, or there is that potential at least for that to happen. So I just want to say, this is a bit of a ranty McShambles, but I want you to know that you're not alone in this. And if you're still in the stage of doing everything yourself, heading towards burnout, pushing through, not asking, it makes complete sense why you're doing that. You're not failing at asking for help. You're protecting yourself in the way you learnt to protect yourself. And when you're ready and when it feels safe enough, you can start to practice asking in small ways with people who've shown you that they can hold your needs. In moments when the stakes perhaps feel a bit lower. For me, if I'd even just known that asking for help was a thing, like this is even a thing, you can ask someone to do that. Like that would have been mind-blowing to me to have known that when I was growing up. Just to be aware, just to it is okay. Despite what we may be told, but despite what we might hear, it is okay to ask for help. And, as Carl Jung said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate. Like once we know that this is a thing that we're doing, that maybe this is a pattern we're stuck in of trying to do it all ourselves, then we can start to think about how we can get some relief from that. I hope you have a lovely weekend, whatever you're doing, and I really look forward to talking with you again. Thanks for listening. Take care.